Hello, and welcome to Asked and Answered.
Our intensely named but delightfully frank video.
Yes, guys, welcome back to Asked and Answered. We're here with our 6-week advice series where you ask us any questions you might have about money, life, retirement, the political chaos that we are living through on a day-to-day basis now, and we answer them to the best of our abilities. I'm Chelsea Fagan, founder and CEO of The Financial Diet, writer of increasingly spicy romance novels, and owner of dog. This is Erin. Lowry. Friend, personal finance guru, icon, also owner of dog.
Yes, owner of slightly larger dog.
Her dog is 7 times the size of my dog.
That's true.
But she's a sweetheart. She loves carrots.
Don't they all?
Mona's just okay with them. She loves blueberries. Oh, and clementine slices.
Much softer on the old teeth.
Not my dog's missing teeth getting dragged. Yes. But anyway, so we're here to answer your questions. And as always, this episode is brought to you in partnership with Advisor.com. If you don't know, Advisor.com is a really wonderful financial advisory service. They're a small company. We love them, know them well, have been working with them for some time, and totally endorse them, not only because we love their team and what they do, and we also really endorse working with a financial advisor if you can afford it. I've been doing that myself for years. They operate on a flat fee model, which we really love because it's really transparent, and it also makes financial advising a lot more accessible. I personally used to think that financial advisors were only for really, really rich people. It turns out they're not. And having a flat fee model just allows it to be something that people can engage with way earlier in their financial journey. If you've ever been curious about working with a financial advisor, especially in these turbulent times, I highly recommend clicking the link in our description so you can set up a free call with them to learn more about it and just kind of get to know them. I, again, have been working with an advisor for years and really recommend the experience, but it's a free call. It costs nothing. And as a member of our community, you get an exclusive discount on your first year of working with them. Just click the link in our description and the rest is history. Anyway, asked and answered. Today we are talking about the subject of real estate, which, while not a universal financial experience and despite popular opinion not necessary to being good with money or even becoming wealthy, it definitely is a popular subject and something a lot of people have been asking about, especially with this ultra chaotic new administration. What's going to happen to interest rates? What's going to happen to the housing market? Many, many such questions. So you guys wrote in and we're going to dive in on the topic of real estate. Erin, do you own a home?
I do.
Slay, me too. We actually own homes very close to each other, both apartments, although hers is larger than mine. So she's canceled. Check your privilege.
I have one additional person living in my house. There you go.
And a dog that's 7 times the size of my dog. No, I very much own a home, love owning a home. It was one of the highlights of my financial career. But I'm also very much of the opinion that it worked out for me because of a combination of factors that I don't think will be, hopefully won't be reproduced anytime soon because one of them was COVID, but that you can definitely be killing it on your financial journey without owning a home. And sometimes owning a home can actually set you back on your financial journey in a lot of ways, big and small, which we'll get into. But let's get into your questions. Number 1, on that note, everyone says to buy a home as it's your most important investment, but is that really the only option?
It doesn't need to be any part of your investment.
It can be your most important liability in some cases.
Yes. I mean, it is your most important investment in so much as things can go really wrong really fast in a way that's very different from the stock market, where everybody is kind of experiencing it if the stock market is going through a downturn. Historically, we know it course corrects and comes back around. If you own a home, we'd like to say that the housing market course corrects. Well, it depends. If you lose your home because of a natural disaster, that's not necessarily going to mean you're going to get a payout that is equivalent to the value of your house. There's just so much tied up in that. So it's your most important investment to protect if you have one, but even that is not a guarantee.
Look at all of the people who have bought homes in like the Rust Belt for, these like Victorian mini mansions for 10 grand. Those were at one point one of the best investments you could make. And to your point about the housing market correcting, it is not like the stock market in that it is much, much more case by case basis, and it is impacted by so many things outside of just economic markets. It's impacted by the life and health of the city itself, the industries that are available there, the desirability of the living space, racism, let's be clear, not that doesn't impact the stock market at all, but like, for example, we can look historically at patterns of like, when a neighborhood gets less white, the property values are immediately impacted. You see white flight. That is something you still see quite frequently. So there are a lot of social and political factors that bear on real estate in a way that they do not, to the same extent, at least, in the stock market. Also, the literal physical world we live in. Look what just happened in Los Angeles. Now, I'm sure, especially given that those wildfires affected some of the wealthiest areas in Los Angeles, likely those people are going to shake out pretty good on insurance, but that's devastating in the meantime. And that is something that, like, the stock market can't burn down. It can't be flooded. It can't, be condemned because of structural damage. It can't have a tree fall on it and, totally wipe out half of the roof. So I think that when we talk about, I think some people, especially in older generations, are very oriented towards real estate as an investment vehicle because you can touch it, you can live in it, you can see it with your eyes. But it's important to remember, especially as we start to decouple our financial strategy from these more emotional factors, is that the same things that make it tangible also make it more volatile by nature and also make it subject to a lot of other factors that would not be the case if it were just a number on a piece of paper, as investment is often referred to as. So I think all of those are really important to consider. Now, on the other hand, you do need to live somewhere, and you can't live in the Vanguard brokerage portal.
That is true.
Although my husband has tried. He spends a lot of time there. So it is important to remember that the trade-off of not owning a home is not eliminating that cost altogether. It's just paying it in rent. Now, I don't agree with boomers that this is just throwing away your money, insofar as I don't think buying food is throwing away your money. It's you need to eat and you're paying for it, and that's a cost associated with living. But I definitely think it's very important to remember that not only is real estate not always your most important investment, in many cases, it can be your most risky investment. It could also be one of your most lucrative. People can make a lot of money in a short period of time on real estate, but that's increasingly rare. We're sort of really winding down the house flipping boom that we saw. And also, it is very far from guaranteed. And you can easily end up, especially when you start getting into things like real estate speculation, you can end up easily over leveraged. You can end up upside down. You can end up not being able to cover your costs through rental. So be very careful with real estate.
It can make a lot of sense as a part of your portfolio, but to echo the renting is just throwing your money away sentiment, it's exhausting and frankly incorrect when people say that, particularly if you live in an area where it just makes more sense for you to rent compared to buying, whether because of the cost of homes or maybe because it's just quite cheap to rent in certain areas. So it makes sense to have more flexibility in terms of where you could move or keeping your costs really, really low for a period of time while you're saving up for other things. Don't let anyone ever convince you that it's throwing your money away just to rent. You are just exchanging money for a service. And depending on the state or city that you live in, it means you really don't have to stress about things like if a pipe bursts, if something goes out, if there's rodent infestation. Can you tell we live in New York? Or things like that, where then it's on the landlord to handle and you don't have to deal with it. Because once you could become a homeowner, there's a whole different host of headaches to deal with.
This is one of the reasons why I love living in a co-op, because a lot of those headaches that you just described are not our responsibility. We pay a co-op fee and then the co-op handles it. The building handles it. We hire people to do that. But again, that's just another example of how every aspect of the home buying process has benefits and drawbacks in a way that investing in the market does not. And then the way that renting does not. There's something also nice about renting too, and having things be not your problem, especially if you have a good rental situation. When we had a part go out on our refrigerator that we did not purchase and would not have purchased because it was a $10,000 refrigerator and custom built into our cabinetry and could not be removed. And it's a model they no longer make. So we had to get a piece custom made and it still doesn't quite fit. And that cost us like $1,300 in a day.
The current place. Oh, no.
Yeah, our oven hasn't worked for a year because it's a piece that we have to get like custom replaced. Like there's something great about having a beautiful custom built-in kitchen, but then you realize when something goes wrong, it is 3 times the hassle to fix, and you can only get professionals to do it because they have to like move everything in and out. So all of these things are things that you would never have to consider in a rental. Who spends $10,000 on a refrigerator? I'm moving in with my fiance into the home he owns. I've never owned a home. What should I know about combining our finances and protecting myself?
You absolutely should not be combining your finances if you are moving in and don't yet have a legally signed document stating that you are husband and wife.
I mean, listen, I agree. It's against my religion to pay a man rent. Please.
The big thing to consider when it comes to moving into a partner's house, if they own it, is if you are paying anything towards the house, do you have any sort of claim to that home? So depending on how long you've been together and how long you've lived there and where you live, maybe kind of like a squatter's rights situation.
Squatter's rights.
The idea of helping someone else build equity without any sort of protection for yourself is a problem. You really do need to have a legally signed document about it. Particularly, it sounds, you said you're engaged, so ultimately this is going to probably shift a lot in the coming years. But if you get a prenup, it could be that the house is exclusively his asset. So again, something to consider. But you need to know too, if something were to happen to your fiance, you live in this house, especially if it's before you're married, who legally then gets to inherit the house? If he does not have an estate plan and does not have a will that specifically names you, I can almost guarantee you that you are not the next of kin that's going to be entitled to get that house. So it's really important to protect yourself from that front too, that there needs to be legal documents that state that you are the person who should receive this house if something were to happen to your partner.
Asked and answered. Also, so 2 things. 1, I don't know if you're a woman and he's a man, but I'm going to assume you are given the demographic breakdown of both the country and my audience. You're going to pay a man rent and have him be your landlord while you're also sleeping with him, cooking him meals, washing his clothes.
Well, we don't know that she's doing all of that.
Let's assume. If that's the case, that's a shame. Not just for you, but for all women. We got to cut that out. He should be paying you to live there. Let's start there. But to your point, you should not be paying rent to build someone else's equity and have no benefits from it, especially if you plan to get married. You should be on the deed. You should be an equal owner and beneficiary of anything that you're contributing. I know we differ in this regard, but I'm of the opinion that in these het marriages, it should be like his money is our money. Your money is your money. I believe we should be exploiting these men more. But in the case that you're not, it should at least be equal. It should at least be equal. And the idea that he would just be cashing these checks and building up the equity while you see nothing from it. Renting isn't always throwing away your money. But if you're in this dynamic, then I think it is.
Well, also, you need to have conversations ahead of time about who's responsible for what. So if something happens to the roof, if a pipe bursts, if anything goes wrong, are you at all financially responsible to chip in for that? I say no. You're not getting any benefit of this house other than it's a roof over your head, but you currently live elsewhere. So that's a big part of it. Now, obviously, there's nuance on utility costs are going to go up, and, you know, there's going to be shared groceries and there's shared other things. So there are certain expenses that it makes sense for the two of you to share. But paying directly towards the mortgage should not be one of them. And he should be exclusively responsible for anything that goes wrong with the house before you get married. Again, so much of this is going to shift once you legally commingle some of your funds. So whether or not you decide to go joint or not, you are legally seen by the state and the laws that dictate marriage and therefore also divorce. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But if it does, there are systems in place for how to handle things. You just really need to make sure you're protecting yourself, because if the engagement gets called off, how long do you have to leave? Is that money that you could have been saving up for an alternative spot, for your own down payment, et cetera, et cetera?
Also, is this a house you would have bought? Like, I personally, home ownership to me is a very important thing from a living day-to-day emotional logistical point of view. Like, one thing to consider, I have someone who went through this situation where she was marrying a man who already owned a home. She did not want to live in that home. And she was like, one of the conditions of our marriage is that we sell this home and we buy a home that I would also have chosen to buy, because I don't want to be grandfathered in to a man's, let's start there, a 20-something bachelor's decision of the kind of house he wants to own. For context, it was one of those shoebox bachelor condos in Midtown. You could spend your whole life decorating those apartments. They would still look like an Airbnb, and a bad one at that. And she was like, love you, will not live here. So we got to sell this and buy a home that I would live in. Which that's also a question to ask yourself. But in general, I don't like it. We're off to a bad start if a man was going to let you pay rent to live in his house and build no equity in the process. So make sure that that was not what he was thinking was going to happen.
And there should be conversations around how will things shift in the future when we are married. Is this going to be thought of as an asset the two of us are sharing? Are we having a prenup? Are we not having a prenup? What happens if in the future we do buy another house? And what if you're in the fortunate position that you're keeping the first property, using it as a rental property, and then moving on to a different house? Is that rental income solely his? Is it part of the marital pot? Is it shared? I mean, these are a lot of conversations that you want to have before legally saying I do to each other, so that there also are no really big surprises after the fact.
Also, is the fact that he owns a home and you never have, is that one small indicator of a larger power imbalance that's filtering through all different aspects of your financial status, respectively? Because if so, you better get a prenup in place that has him by the, you know what, if anything happens. I think it cannot be stated enough. If you're a woman who dates and marries men, the man you choose to marry and the way in which you marry him is the single most important decision you will ever make. It just is. It will have the most downstream impacts financially. It will have the most downstream impacts in terms of your day-to-day quality of life, in terms of if you want a family, who your partner is in raising that family. Like, on no level should any financial imbalance at the outset be taken with anything less than due seriousness. Because the last thing you want as a woman is for a man to have a lot of leverage over you. You just don't. So you need to take this very seriously. And the fact that you're already going into it on such unequal footing from a financial perspective is to me, that's something to immediately say, skirt, let's redo this.
I will also throw out there, though, same for same-sex couples, where if one person vastly out-earns the other and there also is an imbalance like this, these should all be similar conversations that you're having.
You should. I just think that there's just not as many social gender imbalances that are already tilting the table so hard in one person's favor, especially, again, if you're considering having a family.
But you just make sure you know who believes that they're entitled to what. It says a lot about your partner when you're having these conversations.
For sure. And I mean, we've talked about it in the prenup conversation, but, for example, if you as the woman, because it's usually the woman who ends up taking a hit to her career, if you have kids, if you're going to be taking a hit, that better be reflected penny for penny in any kind of agreement, because the number of women, a good friend of mine took a huge hit to her career. The husband did not. They got divorced, did not have a good prenup, and she was way, way, way set back financially as a result in terms of earning potential. And that was not reflected in their settlement. It happens more than you think.
Mm-hmm. And because a lot of people think that, oh, my partner wouldn't do X, Y, Z. You don't know the person you're divorcing.
Listen, again, I don't think any woman should enter a partnership with a man unless she has him by the, What's your advice on potentially buying a home with someone before marriage? Kind of ties in.
Man, we're just keep hitting all my greatest hits of don't do it.
Don't do it.
So generally, the caveat, I would say, if two friends are interested in buying a house together, it can still be very complicated, but it's an interesting option for how people can get into the housing market if that's something that's very important to you. Again, need to have a lot of contracts, a lot of conversations. But you really should not make large financial decisions with someone that you maybe plan to get married to, but could functionally break up with and go your separate ways. And then you have to have a lot of legal conversations about how to either sell the house or buy someone out, how all of this works. Let's pull it back to Bravo. I think that was one of the very interesting parts of Scandival, was what was going to happen to Tom and Ariana's house. And a big part of that being because one person had used it as collateral in a business. And who has what percentage of equity, and are you putting the same amount of money into the house? And if you don't earn the same amount of money and you don't have exactly the same amount of equity, what does that look like in a possible buyout situation? There's just a lot to unpack there. Instead, wait until you are married before you buy a home together and make a really big financial decision. And if it's not someone that you want to marry, definitely don't buy a house together. And you've decided like, hey, marriage isn't important to me, that's not something that I want, it's not how I plan to live my life, and I still want to have a home as an asset, then look to buy one in just your name and have a conversation around what that means for your partner.
I totally agree. That's an important thing to note, is that if you are not like interested in being a life partner with someone, don't get the worst of both worlds and intermingle your finances to that extent. Like you're getting all the downsides of marriage and none of the upsides. Like, also, again, let's just say that this is a woman dating a man, because again, statistically, that's the odds. He wants to buy a home with you. He hasn't proposed.
It's a big commitment.
What's going on? He wants to buy a home with you, but he hasn't proposed. Something's not right there. Don't like that. Don't like that. Yeah. And honestly, I think, one of my dear friends, she bought a home. I think she was in the very early stages of dating now her life partner, a man. And he was renting from her for a while because she was like, in no way on God's green earth am I going to in any way jeopardize my financial accomplishments, my financial future for a man until I'm damn sure. And the fact that some of these men, I mean, it's very like, the fact that they will do everything up to actually committing to you for life and being a life partner. Again, no one ever goes into a relationship thinking that's the kind of person they're with, but it is fairly common for men to do that. And you could end up in a situation, not unlike Ariana Madix of Vanderpump Rules fame, where you are now anchored to this horrendous man who didn't even marry you.
And you both have to live in this house while you figure out how to break up and separate and all of that.
And you're not even getting alimony. You're not even getting spousal support as a result. Unless it's benefiting you greatly, don't intermingle your finances with a man. Will buying a home be a dumb thing to do given the state of the country?
Well, I hope not. It's a great question. We don't know, I guess, is first things first. Although having an asset that hopefully does not crater in value, hopefully still retains financial value for you and practical use as well. The problem is in the future, we don't know what things are going to look like in terms of costs of mortgages and interest rates. We don't know how insurance is going to shake out in certain states and cities where policy changes are making it very costly for people to get insurance that they need, whether it's flood insurance or fire insurance. And it doesn't seem very likely that the government's going to kind of like step in and create a lot of policy that's going to protect the consumer on that front. So if you live in an area where there is a high risk to your property of something in terms of a natural disaster happening, that is a big consideration you want to make about buying in that area.
The fact that people are still buying on Miami Beach, like, at this point, you might as well give your money to a wallet inspector. Like, unbelievable to me. They're like uninsurable at this point. But I agree with all that. I would also say, listen, mortgage interest rates have been eye-watering for a long, long time now. A lot of people have locked into some bad mortgages. And prices are still, in my opinion, not nearly as low as they would need to be to offset those mortgage interest rates. So the home buying conditions have been bad for quite some time, especially depending on where you live. Like our friends who have been looking to buy in the Philadelphia area, it's been 4 years of, well, since the pandemic, so 5 years plus now of madness in these home markets. And so to me, the only question of whether or not a home purchase is a good idea from a financial perspective is assessing the market that you're buying in, assessing the interest rate you're buying it for, assessing the price that you're buying it at. Is it likely to appreciate at a pace that outpaces averages? That's kind of the only way for me to assess whether or not it's likely to be a good financial decision. All the rest is kind of completely subjective. But from a financial POV, that's the only information we have. And for the past 5 years, the answer to that question for a lot of home markets has been no, a resounding no. So I think, interest rates are likely to soften, I think, going forward. Home purchases, or home prices rather, may also fall a bit, although usually they will do the opposite if interest rates go down. But given the sort of overall panicky nature, who knows, maybe they will also become more reasonable. But I don't think the criteria by which you should be judging whether or not a home purchase is a smart investment is going to change regardless of who's president.
Well, you should also be considering the quality of the home that you're buying. And by that, I mean, because there were obviously supply chain issues happening in the pandemic, who knows how things are going to shake out with tariffs, what that could mean for supply chain issues too for building homes. The quality of the actual materials being used for these builds, how fast they're being put up, the quality of the craftsmanship going into them. So if you are looking into buying a new construction, really doing your due diligence to make sure that this is a quality investment that's going to really endure for you, especially at the price point at which you might be buying it. So you do want to consider all of those pieces as well.
I think it's safe to say about 85 to 90% of new builds are trash in terms of overall quality of construction and materials. Trash, including in really high desirability areas, including at very high price points. These are just not good builds anymore. They're just not. They're also ugly as sin in most cases, but they're definitely very low quality. I think sometimes, just like musing, I was a nanny for a long time, and I was a nanny for this one family who was living in a very high cost of living area. They bought a new construction in a gated community on a postage stamp of land for the size of the home. I think the home had like 7+ bedrooms, was massive McMansion on the tiniest little parcel of land in a gated subdivision where, it was like one after the other. I remember this house was made of just toothpicks and tissue paper. Like, it was like everything was particle board MDF. You could hear everything from every floor. It was like doorknobs were on backwards, the faucets were on backwards. Like, it was just the shittiest possible construction. And they bought it like January of 2007. Oh. And I know that there is not because I based on a few context clues, I think they probably paid somewhere between like $850 and $1 million for it. I would venture to guess that when the market crashed, their house probably went down to maybe $500,000, probably less. And it's also just a terrible, terrible home. So I bet in the, almost 20 years since that, there's been just a whole host of nightmarish issues related to that construction. You think about it, they were probably sold a dream, as all home buyers are. And those brokers were just looking to close that deal, especially in 2007. Yep. And it probably took them a decade plus to get out from underwater on that home and to recover from the hit that they took on it. Happens every day. Happens every day. And you don't even get a cute house out of it. How should I save up for a home purchase in the next 5-ish years? Is this a high yield savings account situation or an investing in the market situation?
The decision about whether or not to invest money that you're going to need in 5 years depends on a couple of factors. A big one is your personal risk tolerance. How much volatility can you personally stomach? Will you just keep logging in every day to check to see if it's grown? If it starts to dip a little bit, are you going to panic and try to pull it out? And also, how much flexibility do you have on your time horizon, which is the fancy investing jargon way of saying the time that you need your money. So right now you're saying it's 5 years. What happens if you invest, your money's making great return for 3, and then you decide to, keep it invested, not move it to a more conservative investment or into cash. And then in year 4, the market goes down, and it goes down for an extended period of time, say 2 to 3 years. Are you willing to move your goal of buying a house from 5 years to maybe 7, 8, 9? Is that doable for you? If not, sure, invest some of it, this is not investing advice, but maybe invest some of it, a portion of it, because you want to see a little bit better return than just a high yield savings account. High yield savings accounts rates will likely continue to come down again, so you're not going to be seeing great returns necessarily in a savings account. So keeping your money for 5 years in just savings, you're going to be losing some earning potential, but you want to really be careful about the risk you're willing to take.
I agree. I think the number one factor that I think sets you up for failure when it comes to home buying as a good investment is being really limited on when you have to buy that home. Sometimes it's inescapable, although I think that even in a lot of situations, you could probably just rent for a while and take your time finding it. But a lot of people, for example, made a lot of really bad home buying decisions at peak pandemic. They were leaving urban areas. They were going into these surrounding suburban areas where the prices were hyperinflated. Now, the mortgage interest rates at that time were quite low, but nonetheless, they were paying obscene over what, the price should have been. Often they were paying well over asking. They were doing all cash. There was just a crush to buy homes in a very short period of time. And that almost always comes at a great cost in terms of not being able to wait for the gem. And I think given how much the price of homes has outpaced other economic indicators like cost of living, average salaries, all of these other things, like homes have gotten ludicrously expensive. And this is actually a very big macroeconomic issue when you look at the number of boomers who are relying on their home for a large part of their retirement, because they're essentially backed into a situation where they're expecting to sell these homes that they bought for, 50 grand in whatever year. They're expecting to sell them for $1 million plus. And in many ways they need to. And also housing stock is still not keeping up with demand in a lot of areas. So you're entering a situation where for a lot of people, home buying is not a great financial decision and is really too expensive. I mean, think about, like, just a random example, but think about all of the government workers who've been laid off really unexpectedly in the past few months. How many of those people are tied up, or the past few weeks, how many of those people are tied up to mortgages that are completely unsustainable without their income, and they can't downsize because it's not a good market to sell into right now. These things happen all the time. And I think it's really important to understand that part of the reason we have this sort of received wisdom that home buying is always such a good decision is because it used to be. It used to be a lot better decision. And it used to be much, much more attainable for the average person. People, generally speaking, used to buy homes on one salary with in often blue collar jobs with no college education, no student debt, none of these things. And they were buying these homes that they could live in for 20, 30, 40 years and then sell at a handsome profit.
And at mortgage interest rates that were significantly higher actually than the ones we're seeing today. And that's the rhetoric you're going to hear a lot is like, well, back in my day, we were paying 11, 12%. So your high interest rate mortgage isn't that high interest rate. Yes, but the cost of your home, even when adjusting for inflation, is about 50% of what people are being asked to pay today. So it's really completely an apples and oranges comparison, not an apples to apples comparison. So especially if you have any parents or well-intending aunts and uncles who are trying to throw that one around, no, not a comparison.
Totally. Also, the market, depending on the market you live in, it is very difficult to even be competitive in the home buying process. I think it's something like 50% of home purchases in New York last year were all cash offers. Most, like 99% of people can't compete with that. There was a really good piece on how for a lot of millennials and even Gen Zers in New York City, they're being partially or entirely supported by boomer wealth. There are a lot of factors that lead to the real estate market being really untenable for average people. Short-term rentals also being a very big problem, no regulation around housing prices and purchasing requirements another. But, for a lot of people, boomer, again, there's a huge transfer of wealth happening right now. And for a lot of the housing market, it is simply impossible to be competitive unless you have parents who can swoop in and take care of it. And so I think in general, it's just really important for people to understand that the housing market is not what it used to be for the middle class, that it may not be realistic, and that above all, hemming yourself into a timeline is the worst thing you can do in terms of being able to wait around for the hidden gem. Because for a lot of people, in order for a home purchase to be a good move financially, it needs to be a hidden gem where the stars align. Stars are not aligning for quite some time now for a lot of people. That was Asked and Answered, your favorite advice show in history. Erin, where can people go to read more about what you do?
You can find me on Instagram at Broke Millennial Blog, on Substack at Broke Millennial, and the website is brokemillennial.com. And the 4-part book series under the same name can be found wherever books are sold, and hopefully your local library.
And me, I'm everywhere. I'm behind you as we speak. All right, guys, I will see you next week. We will see you next week on an all-new episode of Asked and Answered. Bye.